In an IVF procedure, day 0 is the egg pickup. The day after the egg pickup, we call day 1, we just see the fertilization. The fertilized eggs start developing. The days after day 2, day 3, or day 5, the embryos can be frozen and kept in liquid nitrogen for years. So the day we freeze the embryos depends on the patient's number of eggs, the fertilized number of eggs, and the number of best quality embryos. We just prefer to freeze the embryos on day 5, but in some cases we can just also freeze the embryos on day 2 to 3 also. The transfer of frozen embryos is as successful as fresh embryo transfers. We can say that in some cases, frozen embryo transfers are much better than the fresh ones. That depends on the patient's characteristics. If the patient is having too many number of follicles with high number of eggs, if the patient is having high progesterone levels during the stimulation cycle, if there is a problem during the cycle related with the endometrium, it's better to freeze all the embryos. It's called total freezing cycle. In these cases, or with any cause with frozen embryos, the transfer of frozen embryos after thawing is much better with higher success rates. In women younger than 35 years of age, the success rate is like 60%. But the rate drops when the woman's age, maternal age, increases. In women like 40 years of age, frozen embryo cycles end up with pregnancy in 20% of the cases. In some women, we prefer to freeze eggs. In some couples, we prefer to freeze the embryos. Embryo freezing and oocyte freezing are different procedures. But when we plan to use these eggs or oocytes, we thaw them and we plan for the transfer. Freezing when frozen embryos are thawed, the survival rate of these embryos are like 95%. In eggs, thawing of oocytes, the survival rate of the eggs is like 90%. Thanks to modern science, the success rates of thawing processes are very high, and the pregnancy rates achieved from these thawed oocytes or embryos are very good. There are different treatment strategies in order to prepare the patient for a frozen embryo cycle. Among these strategies, one is natural cycle, the other one is hormone replacement cycle. That depends on the patient's and the doctor's preferences. If the patient is just prepared to the thawing cycle with a natural cycle, then there is no pills or added injections given to the patient. The normal implantation window of time, the embryos are transferred. In cases with hormone replacement cycles, the endometrium is prepared with estrogen and then afterwards progesterone pills for the embryo to get implanted into the uterus. If you have a frozen embryo from a previous IVF cycle, you can have them transferred in a thaw cycle. This is much cheaper than a fresh embryo transfer, as you are not going to have any stimulation during this process. It's like 1/3 price of the fresh embryo transfers.